The call that changed everything. The evening sky over California glowed a soft orange, fading slowly into deep purple as the sun sank behind the horizon. Sundar Pichai sat at his desk, staring at the screen in front of him, but his eyes were not on the lines of code, nor on the meeting notes scattered across the desktop. Instead, his mind drifted far away, to memories of Chennai, to the narrow streets filled with voices and honking horns, to the smell of fried snacks that his mother used to prepare when he came home from school. He often told people that he had never expected this life. Becoming the CEO of Google seemed like an impossible dream to that boy, who once waited hours just to use a telephone at the local exchange. But tonight, even with all the success, something inside him felt unsettled, almost restless, as though life was preparing to shift in a way he could not yet understand. His wife, Anjali, entered the room quietly, carrying a cup of tea the way she always did when she sensed he had been lost in thought for too long. "You're still working?" she asked gently. Her voice carried calmness, the kind that had been his anchor since their college days. Sundar smiled, took the cup, and replied, "Trying to, but my mind keeps wandering." She sat across from him and looked at him with a quiet intensity. She had always been the one who noticed when something troubled him, even before he admitted it to himself. "Maybe it's not the work," she said softly. "Maybe it's something else." Sundar leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Sometimes, I wonder if I am doing enough, not for the company but for the people, for the world. Titles and achievements are one thing, but what do they mean if people don't feel uplifted by what we create?" Before she could answer, his phone buzzed on the table. Sundar glanced at the screen and his heart skipped a beat. The name on the display made him sit up straighter, his hand hesitating before reaching for the device. It was an unknown number, but the country code was India. He answered with cautious curiosity, and the moment he heard the voice on the other end, his pulse quickened. "Namaste. This is Narendra Modi." For a second, Sundar froze, unsure if it was real. The Prime Minister of India was speaking directly to him, his tone warm yet firm, carrying the unmistakable weight of leadership. Sundar managed to respond, "Namaste, sir. It is an honor." His wife's eyes widened when she realized who was on the line, but she stayed silent, sensing the importance of the moment. Modi spoke slowly, carefully, as though every word carried a purpose. He praised Sundar for his journey, for his humility despite his global influence. And then he said something that would stay in Sundar's heart forever. "I wanted to reach out not only to you, but to your family, because behind every person who rises, there are those who hold them steady. I wanted to thank your wife, Anjali." Sundar's throat tightened. It was rare for anyone, especially at such a level of power, to acknowledge her role in his life. He looked across the table at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and emotion. He handed her the phone, and for a moment she seemed unsure. She shook her head, mouthing silently, "What do I say?" But Sundar insisted, placing the phone gently in her hands. Her voice trembled at first, but she soon found the honesty that defined her character. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I have always believed that supporting each other is the most natural thing. I am grateful for your kind words, but Sundar's success belongs not only to me or him, but to every teacher, every friend, and every opportunity life gave us." The Prime Minister listened with respect, and his reply was simple, yet profound. "Madam, humility is the rarest jewel, and you carry it with grace. India is proud of you both." When the call ended, there was a silence in the room that felt almost sacred. Sundar looked at Anjali, his heart swelling with a sense of gratitude he could not put into words. He whispered, "The world just heard your heart, and I think it melted millions." But even as the warmth of that moment lingered, a shadow of unease crept into Sundar's thoughts. He could not explain why, but something about the call felt larger than just words of praise. It was as if a door had opened, leading to a path he had not yet chosen. Over the next few days, news of the call spread across social media and television. Millions of people discussed the humility in Anjali's response, praising her for reminding the world that true strength lies not in fame, but in kindness. Journalists wrote articles about how the conversation had touched hearts globally, and many young couples said it inspired them to support each other more deeply. Sundar should have felt proud, but instead he began to sense that expectations around him were shifting, that eyes from around the world were now watching more closely, waiting to see what he would do next. The pressure grew quietly, not in loud demands, but in subtle ways. Messages from colleagues, letters from students in India, emails from strangers thanking him for representing hope. All of it reminded him that he was no longer just a leader of a company. He was becoming a symbol of resilience, humility, and possibility. Yet symbols are heavy to carry, and Sundar often lay awake at night wondering if he could live up to it all. Anjali noticed his sleeplessness, and one evening she placed her hand on his and said, "Don't try to carry the weight of the world alone. People look at you because you remind them that dreams are possible. But you don't have to become someone else. Just be yourself. The boy who once believed a telephone was magic." Sundar smiled faintly, but the unease remained. Then came an unexpected letter. It arrived by post, handwritten, rare in a world of instant emails. The envelope had no sender name, only a return address somewhere in Delhi. Sundar opened it carefully, and the words inside sent a shiver down his spine. "Dear Sundar, the call you received was not only a gesture of respect, it was the beginning of something greater. There will be choices before you soon. Choices that will test not only your mind but your heart. Prepare yourself, because the world is changing and you are meant to stand at the center of it. Signed, a friend." Sundar read it twice, then a third time, but the handwriting revealed nothing. When he showed it to Anjali, her expression grew serious. "Do you think this is just a stranger trying to be poetic? Or is it something more?" He didn't know, but deep inside he felt the letter was not random. In the days that followed, small but strange things began to happen. During one of his late-night drives, he noticed a car that seemed to follow him for several miles before disappearing. At work, he overheard hushed conversations between visitors from overseas, their words slipping into topics about him that seemed unrelated to business. Even at home, the phone rang twice with no answer, only silence on the other end. Anjali grew concerned, urging him to speak to security, but Sundar hesitated. "What if this is not danger?" he asked. "What if it is something else, something connected to the letter?" She looked at him, her eyes full of worry. "Or what if it is both?" The tension reached a breaking point one evening when Sundar returned home to find another envelope slipped under the door. This one contained only a single sentence. "You are being watched, but not for the reasons you think." He held the paper tightly, his breath shallow. Anjali touched his arm, whispering, What does it mean?" Sundar shook his head, his mind racing with possibilities. And at that moment he realized that the call from Modi ji, the praise, the sudden attention, and now these mysterious warnings, and they were all pieces of a puzzle that had only just begun. As he stood by the window looking out into the dark street, he felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. The future was approaching, faster than he had expected. And with a quiet but firm voice, he said to himself, "This is only the beginning." Shadows. Behind the praise. The night after the second envelope arrived, Sundar sat in the living room long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. As the building settled, the paper with the message lay on the coffee table, its presence heavier than it should have been. "You are being watched, but not for the reasons you think." He repeated the words softly, almost as if saying them aloud would help him discover their meaning. He thought of his journey, from the modest apartment in Chennai where he first saw his father's sacrifice, to the crowded classrooms where he dreamed silently, to the long hours of uncertainty during his early career in America. At every stage, life had tested him, but this felt different. This was not about climbing higher. It was about protecting something unseen. Anjali came downstairs quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She found him staring at the paper, lost in thought. "You still haven't moved from here," she said gently, sitting beside him. Sundar turned to her, his eyes filled with questions he could not answer. Why us, Anjali? Why now? What could anyone want from us? She placed her hand on his, her touch steady. Maybe it is not about wanting. Maybe it is about warning. Sundar shook his head slowly. But a warning about what? I can handle criticism. I can handle pressure at work. But this feels like someone is playing a game we don't understand. She leaned closer and whispered, Then we must learn the rules before it's too late. The next morning, Sundar carried on with his schedule, attending meetings, speaking with engineers, and reviewing proposals, but his mind was elsewhere. Even the most ordinary conversations seemed layered with hidden meanings, and he caught himself studying faces more closely than usual. During one meeting with visiting officials, he noticed a man in the corner who did not speak a word, only observed. His presence was almost invisible, yet Sundar's instincts told him the man was there for him, not the meeting. Later, when Sundar left the building, he saw the same man standing outside talking quietly on a phone. The moment their eyes met, the man turned away and disappeared into the crowd. Sundar said nothing to his colleagues, but his unease deepened. Days turned into weeks and the mystery grew. Another letter arrived, this time slipped into the mailbox. It said, Your humility is your strength, but it may also be your weakness. Remember that not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well. Sundar folded the paper carefully, feeling the weight of its warning. He thought about his father, who had always taught him to trust people, to see the good before the bad. It was that openness that had shaped him, that had made him a leader people respected. But now he wondered if that same openness made him vulnerable. When he showed the letter to Anjali, she frowned. This is no longer just strange, Sundar. Someone is trying to prepare you for something. I think you need to tell someone you trust. Sundar hesitated. And who would believe me? I am not afraid of threats, but these are not threats, they are truths spoken in riddles. Soon, a new challenge arrived that had nothing to do with letters but everything to do with pressure. News spread of a crisis involving online misinformation in India. Stories were circulating on platforms, creating unrest, and many looked to Google for solutions. As CEO, Sundar faced both public and political scrutiny. During a press conference, a journalist asked sharply, Mr. Pichai, do you believe your company is doing enough to protect democracy? Sundar answered with calm, explaining ongoing efforts and new initiatives. But inside, the weight of responsibility pressed down harder than ever. After the conference, as he walked backstage, an aide handed him a folded piece of paper. Someone asked me to give this to you, the aide said, uncertain. Sundar opened it, and his breath caught. It was the same handwriting as the earlier letters. The storm is not about technology, it is about trust, and trust will be tested in ways you cannot yet see. The pattern was undeniable now. Someone knew the challenges he faced before they unfolded fully. Someone wanted him to pay attention. He started to notice connections, the rising tension in India, the political attention, the sudden spotlight on his family after Modi's call. Could it all be part of a larger picture? He kept the letters hidden in a drawer, sharing only fragments with Anjali, not wanting her to carry the full burden. But she sensed it anyway. You are becoming more silent these days, she said. One evening, and silence is unlike you. He admitted, I don't want to scare you. But I think whoever is writing these letters knows things, maybe even things about us. They watch from the shadows, yet they don't harm us. They guide almost. She looked at him with steady eyes. Then perhaps they believe in you more than you believe in yourself. Amid this storm, life carried its quiet moments too. Their children continued with school, laughing in the evenings, filling the home with normalcy. Sundar often found himself watching them with an intensity he had never felt before, as though each laugh, each careless joke was a fragile treasure. He realized that no matter how powerful he became, the real measure of his life was here, in these small moments. One evening, as he watched his son work on a science project, he thought of his own childhood, how he once took apart appliances just to see how they worked, how his father never scolded him for breaking things but encouraged his curiosity. It was in those moments that resilience was born, Yet now, the resilience he needed was not for machines, but for mysteries that tested the human spirit. The breaking point came unexpectedly. During a late-night call with colleagues in Europe, Sundar heard a faint click on the line, as if someone else was listening. He brushed it off, but hours later another letter appeared on his desk, placed there without explanation. You are not imagining it. They are listening, but you must ask yourself, who are they, and why do they care about you? Sundar felt a chill. Whoever this friend was, they seemed to have access beyond ordinary reach. He locked the office door and sat in silence, the letter trembling in his hands. For the first time he felt a surge of fear, not for himself but for his family. He realized he could no longer remain passive. He had to uncover the truth. That night, he told Anjali everything, showing her every letter, every detail he had hidden. She listened quietly, her face calm but serious. When he finished, she said, "Then the choice is clear. You cannot ignore this anymore. You must find the person behind these letters, not for yourself, but for all of us." Sundar nodded, feeling both relief and dread. But how? They hide so well. She looked at him with unwavering strength. You have built search engines that find answers across the world. Perhaps it is time to search for the one who searches for you. Sundar began carefully. He revisited every envelope, studying the paper, the handwriting, the stamps. He asked a trusted friend in Delhi to trace the first return address, but the building was empty, long abandoned. The trail led nowhere. Yet the letters kept coming, each one more precise, more unsettling. One read, "Soon, you will face a choice between silence and truth. Choose carefully, for millions will follow your example." The words echoed in his mind day and night. He began to wonder, was this about politics, technology, or something more personal, something deeper? The ambiguity gnawed at him. One evening, while walking through a quiet park with Anjali, he spotted the same silent observer he had noticed at work weeks earlier. The man was sitting on a bench, reading a newspaper, but Sundar knew instantly it was no coincidence. His instincts told him this man was connected to the letters. Sundar considered approaching him, but before he could decide, the man folded the paper, stood, and walked away briskly. Sundar followed, his heart pounding. The chase led through winding paths until suddenly, the man vanished into the crowd, leaving only a small folded note dropped on the ground. Sundar picked it up and his hand shook as he read, "Do not follow me. You are not ready yet. When the time comes, I will find you." Sundar stood frozen, the night air cool against his skin. Behind him, Anjali called his name, her voice filled with urgency. He turned slowly, the note still clutched tightly. His mind raced with questions, his heart heavy with the weight of unanswered riddles. One thing was certain. The shadow behind the praise was no longer distant. It was near, closer than he had ever imagined. And as the wind rustled through the trees, Sundar knew the next step would demand more than intellect. It would demand courage, the kind that could change not only his life, but the lives of millions who now looked to him for hope. The weight of unseen hands. The days after the park encounter felt heavier than any boardroom decision Sundar had ever faced. Every sound seemed sharper. Every glance from a stranger lingered a little too long, and every word in the mysterious letters replayed endlessly in his mind. You are not ready yet. When the time comes, I will find you. Those words gnawed at him because they carried both warning and promise. But what was he supposed to prepare for? What storm was coming that he could not yet see? Sundar, a man of logic and reason, felt trapped in a web of uncertainty that no algorithm could solve. Anjali noticed his growing distraction. She often found him staring at the window late at night, his tea untouched, his eyes distant. One evening, as she placed her hand gently on his shoulder, she asked softly, "Do you remember when we were students and you used to solve every problem by drawing diagrams in the margins of your notebook?" Sundar smiled faintly. "Yes. I believed that if you could map a problem, you could always find the solution." She leaned closer and whispered, Then maybe it's time to draw again. Map this mystery out, piece by piece. Don't let fear cloud your clarity. Her words gave him direction. Sundar began writing everything he knew about the letters, the strange man, and the timing of Modiji's call. He filled pages with notes, arrows, and connections. At first, it looked like scattered fragments, but slowly patterns began to emerge. The letters always arrived at moments of heightened tension in his work or personal life. They seemed to anticipate challenges before they fully revealed themselves. The first had come after the call with Modiji, when the world's attention suddenly shifted toward his family. The second came when the misinformation crisis began rising in India. The third arrived after his press conference, as questions about democracy and trust were asked. Each letter was connected not to him personally, but to events larger than him. And yet somehow, he was placed at the center of them. This realization unsettled him. Why would someone choose him, a man of technology, to be part of something so political, so global, so human? He had built tools, yes, but he had never seen himself as a symbol of resistance or revolution. Humility had always been his guide, but the letters were forcing him to consider that his humility might be exactly why he was chosen. The mystery deepened one afternoon when Sundar received an unexpected visit from an old college friend named Arjun. They had not seen each other in years, and the reunion was warm but tinged with curiosity. Over tea, Arjun said, "You've changed, Sundar, but not in the way I feared. You're still grounded. Still the same man who used to walk across campus in worn shoes because you refused to ask your parents for money." Sundar laughed softly, remembering those days. But then Arjun's expression grew serious. "I came, not only to see you, but to tell you something. There are people watching you, and not just for your leadership at Google. They believe you represent a bridge between worlds, East and West, tradition and progress, power and humility. You may not see it, but you are part of something far bigger than yourself." Sundar felt a chill. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Arjun, how do you know this?" Arjun hesitated, glancing around the room as if making sure no one else was listening. "Because someone approached me months ago, asking about you. They wanted to know about your values, your past, your character. They said they needed to understand if you were strong enough for what was coming. I didn't understand it then, but now I think it's connected to what you've been experiencing." The confession left Sundar shaken. Someone had been studying him long before the letters arrived, and now his friend confirmed it was not random. It was deliberate, calculated. After Arjun left, Sundar shared everything with Anjali. She listened quietly, then asked a question that pierced his heart. "Do you trust Arjun?" Sundar hesitated. "I want to. But what if he is part of the game? What if his visit was meant to mislead me?" She nodded slowly. "Then you must move carefully. Trust, but verify." In the weeks that followed, Sundar began to live in two worlds. In one, he continued his role as CEO, attending high-profile meetings, guiding teams, and navigating global crises of technology. In the other, he quietly investigated the shadows surrounding him. He hired a discreet analyst to study the handwriting of the letters, but no clear match was found. He traced the envelopes, but each one came from a different location in India, as if someone wanted to make sure the trail went nowhere. And yet, each time a letter arrived, Sundar felt both dread and strange reassurance. They were unsettling, yes, but they also seemed to protect him, warning him of dangers before they struck. Then came the letter that shook him most. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no stamp, slipped directly into his office drawer, though only his assistant had access. He opened it with trembling fingers. The world will soon face a decision. Leaders will be tempted by fear, by division, by control. But there will be one voice they look to, not for power but for balance. Prepare yourself. Your humility will be tested, your resilience pushed to its limits, and your kindness questioned in ways you never imagined. You must decide. Will you remain silent, or will you speak when silence is safest? Sundar sat for hours staring at the letter. It felt less like a warning and more like a prophecy. He thought about his childhood again, his father's patience, his mother's warmth, the sacrifices they made so he could study abroad. He thought about the moment he first held a computer, the sense of wonder that defined his path. And he thought about his wife who had always believed in him before he believed in himself. These memories reminded him that humility was not weakness, it was strength, the kind of strength that could stand even when the world demanded compromise. But knowing this did not make the fear vanish. The fear grew stronger when Anjali found a letter waiting in her car one morning. It was short. Only 5 words. Protect your children. They are watching. She brought it inside, her face pale but calm. Sundar felt rage and terror flood his chest. Whoever was behind this had crossed a line. This was no longer about him. It was about his family. He considered going public, telling the authorities, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the sense that exposing it too soon might make things worse. Perhaps it was the feeling that these letters were not threats, but trials designed to force him into strength. Yet as he looked at his children laughing upstairs, his heart ached. "What kind of father am I?" he whispered, "if I cannot protect them from shadows?" Anjali held his hand tightly. "You are the kind of father who faces shadows head-on. But you cannot do it alone. Whoever is sending these messages, they are forcing you to choose. Maybe it is time you choose not fear but action." That night Sundar made a decision. He would stop waiting for the shadows to find him. He would go to India quietly, without public attention, and try to uncover the truth at its source. He told Anjali his plan, expecting resistance, but she surprised him. "If this is what you must do, then do it. But remember, the strength you carry is not just in you, it is in us. No matter what happens, you are not alone." As his flight touched down in Delhi weeks later, Sundar felt a mix of fear and determination. The city was alive with its usual chaos, honking horns, crowded streets, the smell of spices drifting from vendors. But beneath the noise, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. His childhood home was only a few hours away, yet the man he had become was far removed from that boy. Now he walked not as a student returning, but as a symbol entangled in something far larger than he had ever imagined. His first step was to visit the abandoned building tied to the return address of the first letter. The structure was old, its paint peeling, its windows broken. As he walked through the dusty corridors, he noticed faint signs that someone had been there recently. Footprints in the dirt, a faint smell of incense lingering in the air. Then on a cracked wooden table he saw it. Another envelope waiting as though it had been placed there for him. He opened it slowly, his heart pounding. Inside were only 4 words, written in the same hand. "You are getting closer." Sundar stood frozen, the letter trembling in his grasp. How did they know he would come here? Were they watching him now, even as he read those words? He stepped back, scanning the shadows of the building, but saw no one. The silence pressed down on him, broken only by the faint sound of a door creaking somewhere in the distance. He rushed outside into the open air, his chest tight, his mind racing. The city lights flickered in the distance, but here, in the abandoned lot, the world felt eerily quiet. He looked around, searching for movement, for any sign of the watcher. But there was nothing. Only the letter in his hand, and the growing certainty that he was no longer chasing shadows. The shadows were leading him, and as he stood there with the weight of unseen hands guiding his every step, Sundar whispered to himself, "This is no longer a game. This is a path I must walk, no matter where it leads." But deep inside, he knew that path was about to demand more than he had ever given before. The cost of knowing the streets of Delhi were alive with their usual chaos. But for Sundar, each sound carried a new sharpness. The honk of a rickshaw, the chatter of vendors, the rustle of footsteps behind him. All of it felt heightened, as though the city itself was whispering secrets he could not yet understand. In his hand he held the latest note. "You are getting closer." Those words refused to leave his mind, echoing with both hope and dread. Closer to what? Closer to who? And what would happen when he finally reached the end of this strange path? He checked into a modest guest house under a different name, avoiding hotels that might draw attention. The walls of his room were plain, the furniture simple, but the quiet gave him space to think. He spread the letters out on the bed, placing them in order. Each one felt like a breadcrumb leading him deeper into a forest of shadows. But if there was a path, then there had to be a destination. And if someone was leading him there, it meant they wanted him to arrive. That night, Sundar dreamt of his childhood home. He saw his father sitting at the small wooden table, balancing bills late into the night. He saw his mother humming softly as she prepared food, her hands moving with patience and care. He saw himself, a boy staring at a telephone with wonder, not knowing how that small object would shape his destiny. When he woke, his pillow was damp with sweat. The dream felt less like memory and more like a reminder that his roots were still in India, and perhaps the answers he sought were tied not only to his present but to his past. The following morning he took a car to Chennai where he had grown up. The streets were familiar, though modern life had changed them. The old house still stood, though strangers now lived inside. Sundar stood outside the gate for a long time, memories flooding his heart. And then, tucked into the corner of the gate, he saw something that made him freeze. An envelope weathered by the sun with his name written on it. His hands trembled as he picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a question written in neat, careful strokes. "Do you still believe humility can guide power?" The words pierced him deeply. Humility had always been his compass, but lately he wondered if it was enough. Power was loud, ruthless, and often merciless. Humility was soft, fragile, and easily dismissed. Could humility truly guide power in a world filled with noise and division? He folded the letter slowly, staring at the house that once sheltered his boyhood. His heart whispered yes, but his mind was unsure. As he turned to leave, a voice spoke behind him. "You came back." Sundar spun around, startled. An elderly man stood by the roadside, his clothes simple, his eyes bright with recognition. Sundar did not know him, yet there was something familiar in the way the man studied him. "Do I know you?" Sundar asked carefully. The man smiled faintly. "Not yet, but you will. The one who writes to you is not your enemy. They are testing you. They believe the world will need you in ways you cannot yet imagine." Before Sundar could ask more, the man walked away into the crowd, disappearing as suddenly as he had appeared. The encounter left Sundar shaken. Was this stranger connected to the letters? Or was he simply another piece of the puzzle meant to confuse him further? He returned to his guest house, his thoughts spinning, only to find another letter waiting at the door. "You are asking the right questions, but beware. The closer you come to truth, the more others will try to stop you." That warning became real sooner than he expected. The very next day, he received an urgent call from California. Anjali's voice trembled on the line, though she tried to stay calm. Someone tried to approach the children at school. Security intervened, but the man disappeared before they could catch him. Sundar felt his chest tighten, his breath growing shallow. Fear unlike any he had ever known surged through him. "Are they safe now?" he asked desperately. "Yes," she assured him, "but the children are frightened, and so am I." Rage mixed with fear inside him. Whoever was behind this had now crossed into dangerous territory. His family was no longer just being watched. They were being targeted. Sundar wanted to abandon the search, to fly back home immediately. But another part of him knew that if he turned away now, the shadows would never leave them. To protect his family, he had to finish this journey no matter the cost. His next step took him to Delhi again, this time to a quiet library that held old government archives. He had noticed that some of the letters referenced not only personal values but broader themes: democracy, trust, division. Perhaps there was a connection between these messages and historical struggles. As he sifted through dusty records, he found documents about leaders who had once tried to bridge divides, men and women who carried both respect and humility, yet were crushed by larger powers. Reading their stories, he felt a strange kinship, Perhaps the writer of the letters wanted him to understand that his story was part of a much older struggle, one that stretched beyond borders and time. But as he left the library that evening, he felt the presence again. Someone was following him. He quickened his steps, weaving through narrow lanes, his heart pounding. Finally, he ducked into a small tea shop, sitting at the back where he could watch the street unseen. After several minutes, he saw him. The same silent observer from California, the man with the newspaper. He was here too, across an ocean, watching still. Sundar's pulse raced. This was no coincidence. The man entered the shop slowly, pretending to order tea, but his eyes scanned the room until they landed on Sundar. Their gaze locked and time seemed to freeze. Sundar stood ready to confront him, but before he could speak, the man slipped a folded paper onto the counter and walked out into the night. Sundar rushed to grab it, unfolding it with trembling hands. The note read, "Meet me at the banks of the Yamuna at dawn. Come alone. Answers await." That night, Sundar barely slept. He thought of Anjali and the children, of the danger that seemed to follow him everywhere. He thought of the mysterious friend who had written so many letters, yet never revealed themselves. He thought of the silent observer now finally stepping out of the shadows. By dawn, as the first light touched the city, he was already on his way to the river. The banks of the Yamuna were quiet in the early morning, the water moving slowly, reflecting the pale sky. Sundar stood alone, his breath visible in the cool air. Minutes passed, then footsteps approached. The silent observer emerged from the mist, his face older than Sundar had imagined, lined with years of secrets. He stopped a few feet away, studying Sundar with unreadable eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "You were never meant to live quietly, Sundar." The call from Modi ji was not the beginning. It was only the spark. What follows will test everything you believe about humility, resilience, and kindness. The world is watching, and forces beyond your imagination are moving. The question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you will choose to step forward when silence is safer. Sundar swallowed hard, his heart racing. "Who are you and why me?" The man smiled faintly, as though he had expected the question. "I am the one who has been writing to you. And as for why you, because sometimes history chooses its voices not from the powerful but from the humble. You are the bridge the world will need." Before Sundar could respond, the man turned slightly, as if listening to something in the distance. His eyes narrowed. "They are already here," he whispered urgently. "We don't have much time." And just as Sundar opened his mouth to ask what he meant, a dark vehicle pulled up on the road above the riverbank, its doors opening slowly. Figures stepped out, their movements deliberate, their eyes locked on him. The moment of truth had arrived. The choice of silence. The air on the riverbank felt heavy, as though the morning mist itself carried the weight of danger. Sundar's eyes were fixed on the black vehicle parked above, its doors open like jaws waiting to close. 3 figures stepped out, their movements calm, deliberate. The kind of calm that carried menace. They were not rushing, and that unsettled him more. People in a hurry revealed their desperation. People who moved slowly revealed their certainty. The silent observer, now revealed as the one behind the letters, placed a hand gently on Sundar's arm. His voice was urgent, yet steady. "Listen carefully, you cannot run. If you run, they will see fear. If you fight, they will see defiance. Both paths will close doors. You must choose a third way, the way of stillness. Remember, humility is not weakness. It is the strength to remain steady when storms try to shake you." Sundar's chest tightened. All his life, humility had been his compass, but standing here with unknown men approaching, his instinct was to protect, to resist. Could humility really guide him now, in the face of looming threat? The men reached the bottom of the path and stopped a few feet away. The leader, tall and sharp-eyed, studied Sundar with a cold, calculating gaze. Then he spoke in a voice that carried both authority and disdain. "Mr. Pichai, you should not have come here. You were warned." Sundar's mind raced. Warned? Was he speaking about the letters? About the secrecy he had broken by traveling to India? He opened his mouth to speak, But the silent observer shook his head subtly, urging him to remain calm. The man continued, "You are standing in the middle of forces far larger than your company, far larger than your position. Your every word influences millions, and millions can be dangerous if guided by the wrong message." Sundar felt his throat tighten. "I have always believed in guiding through humility, through kindness, through truth," he said carefully. The man's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Yes, and that is why you are dangerous. Power respects strength. Power fears humility, because humility cannot be controlled." The words struck Sundar like a blow. He realized then that his values, the very things that had shaped his journey, were the threat. To those who built their empires on control, kindness was rebellion. To those who thrived on fear, humility was defiance. The man stepped closer. "You will have to make a choice soon. Speak to the world in ways that reassure, that keep people quiet, compliant, or remain silent altogether, and let others speak for you. But if you continue to speak truth, if you continue to embody humility, then you will find that your family, your company, your very life will be placed at risk." Sundar's heart pounded. He thought of Anjali, of their children. He thought of the note that warned her to protect them. He thought of the long nights when he wondered if humility was enough. And now? Here was the test. Not written in letters, but standing before him in flesh and blood. The silent observer finally spoke, his voice steady, his presence unshaken. "You threaten him because you know his words matter. You fear him because his silence cannot be bought. And yet you do not see that it is not he alone who carries this. It is the millions who believe in him, in the possibility of kindness guiding power." The man turned sharply, glaring at the observer. "And who are you to speak? Are you his protector, his guide, his handler?" The observer's expression did not change. "I am simply the one who reminds him of what he already knows." The tension between them was like a drawn bowstring, taut and ready to snap. Sundar felt caught in the middle, yet he realized this was always where he was meant to be, between two worlds, between noise and silence, between fear and hope. Suddenly, the leader gestured to his men. One stepped forward and placed a folder on the ground between them. "Inside is everything you need to know. The names, the movements, the alliances. You will see how deep this goes, how fragile the balance is. But understand this. Once you open it, you cannot return to ignorance. Once you see, you must choose." The men turned and walked back to their vehicle, leaving the folder on the dirt. The car drove away slowly, disappearing into the mist, as though confident that Sundar would now be consumed by the choice. He stood frozen, staring at the folder. His mind screamed to pick it up, to know the truth, to protect his family by understanding the game. But another voice inside whispered that some truths came with chains, and once bound, he might never walk freely again. The silent observer broke the silence. "This is the moment you feared, the moment when silence seems safer than truth. But remember, silence can protect for a while, but it cannot heal. Only truth can." Sundar looked at him torn. "If I choose truth, I risk everything. If I choose silence, I lose myself." The observer nodded slowly. "And that is the cost of knowing, the cost of leading not just with power, but with humility, the cost of being the bridge." The sun had risen fully now, casting light on the folder as it lay between them. Sundar bent down, his hands trembling, and picked it up. He held it close, feeling the weight not of paper but of destiny. As he stood there, he thought of Modi Ji's call, of Anjali's quiet strength, of his children's laughter, of the millions of strangers who saw in him not a CEO but a reminder that dreams were possible. He thought of the letters that had led him here, each one pushing him closer to this edge. He looked at the silent observer, then at the folder, then at the endless river flowing beside them. "If I open this, there is no going back," he whispered. The observer's eyes softened, yet carried an intensity that pierced straight through him. "That is the point, Sundar. You were never meant to go back. Sundar closed his eyes, drew a deep breath, and slowly opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page, and within seconds his face drained of color. The names inside were not strangers. They were people he knew, people he trusted. His hand shook violently, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. He whispered hoarsely, almost to himself. "This cannot be real." The silent observer placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is real, and now you must decide what to do with it." Before Sundar could respond, a loud crack echoed across the riverbank. The unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The folder slipped from his hands, pages scattering in the wind. He spun around, his heart racing, his breath frozen in his throat, and what he saw in that moment would change everything. The voice that could not be silenced, the sound of the gunshot still echoed in the morning air as Sundar's heart pounded violently in his chest. The folder slipped from his grasp, its pages scattering across the riverbank like broken truths exposed to the wind. For a moment everything slowed. The river seemed still, the mist hung heavy, and even the birds fell silent, as though the world itself held its breath. The silent observer reacted first, pulling Sundar low to the ground. "Stay down," he hissed, scanning the direction of the shot. Sundar's ears rang, his body tense, his mind torn between panic and clarity. This was no longer a test written in riddles, no longer a warning whispered in shadows. This was real. Someone had fired a shot to silence him. When the ringing eased, Sundar dared to lift his head. His eyes scanned the ridge above the river, and for a brief second he saw movement. A figure retreating quickly into the mist, vanishing before he could take in the details. The silent observer cursed under his breath. "They don't want you to see too much, not yet. But they wanted you to know one thing clearly, and that watching you is not enough anymore. Now they want you afraid." Fear did grip Sundar, cold and heavy, but alongside it burned something deeper. Anger. Not the anger that lashes out blindly, but the anger born of love. For his wife, for his children, for the millions who now believed in him as a symbol of possibility. He clenched his fists, his breath shaking. "They think fear will break me," he whispered. "But fear will only show me what matters most." The observer gathered the scattered pages, shoving them back into the folder. He pressed it into Sundar's hands. "You must leave now. They will come again, and next time it will not be a warning shot, but remember what you saw. Remember the names." Sundar glanced at the list once more before tucking it under his arm. His stomach twisted when he recognized familiar figures. Business leaders he had once admired, officials he had trusted, even someone he had considered a friend. Betrayal, cut deep, sharper than any weapon. "Why them?" he asked in a broken voice. The observer's gaze was heavy with sorrow. "Because power bends even the strongest, and fear corrupts even the kindest. You must decide if you will still believe in humility when it reveals such cruelty." Sundar returned to California in silence, carrying the folder like a wound he could not show the world. Anjali met him at the airport, her eyes searching his face. She saw the exhaustion, the fear, and something else, a heaviness that words could not carry. "You saw the truth, didn't you?" she asked softly. He nodded, unable to speak. She touched his cheek gently. "Then you must decide how to live with it." At home, Sundar locked the folder in a drawer, but it haunted him every night. The names replayed in his mind. The gunshot echoed in his ears. The choice pressed down on his chest. Should he remain silent, protecting his family, his company, his fragile peace? Or should he speak, knowing that speaking truth could unleash storms far beyond his control? The pressure mounted when news channels began speculating about him. Commentators wondered aloud why he had traveled to India quietly. Rumors swirled of secret meetings. Journalists asked pointed questions, and behind the headlines, whispers grew louder that Sundar knew something the world did not. One evening, while sitting with his children, he watched them laugh over a simple board game, their faces lit with joy. The sight broke him. These were the lives he feared losing, the innocence he longed to protect. But he realized something in that moment. Silence would not protect them forever. Silence might save them today, but it would leave them vulnerable tomorrow. The world they would inherit would be shaped not by his fear, but by his courage. That night, he sat with Anjali in the quiet of their room. He took her hands in his and said, "I cannot stay silent. If I do, I will betray not only the world but myself. I must speak, not with anger, not with pride, but with the humility that has always guided me." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. "Then speak, Sundar, and know that we will stand with you." The next day, Sundar prepared a speech. It was not written with the language of politics nor the jargon of technology. It was written from the heart. He spoke of trust, of kindness, of resilience. He spoke of how fear and control could never build a future worth living, but humility and respect could. He reminded the world that leadership was not about domination, but about service. Not about silencing, but about listening. The speech was broadcast live. Millions watched across continents. Many expected corporate talking points, but instead they heard raw truth, spoken in steady, simple words. Sundar's voice trembled at times, but his humility gave it strength. "We live in a world where power often tries to drown out kindness," he said. "But kindness is not weakness. It is the courage to remain human when the world demands you to be unfeeling. It is the choice to lift others even when it is easier to push them down. If I must be remembered for anything, let it be for believing that humility can guide power." The response was overwhelming. Some praised him, some mocked him, and some threatened him. But in the homes of ordinary people, his words struck chords that no fear could silence. Young students wrote letters saying they felt inspired. Workers said they felt seen. Parents told their children that truth still had a voice. Yet, Sundar knew the shadows would not disappear. The folder still sat in his drawer, the name still carved into his mind, the gunshot still echoing in memory. But he also knew something else. Fear no longer held him hostage. He had spoken, and in speaking, he had chosen the path of truth. Late, one evening as he sat by the window watching the lights of the city, he heard his phone buzz. A message flashed on the screen. It was from an unknown number, but the handwriting in the attached image was unmistakable. It was from the silent observer. The note was brief. "You chose well. The road ahead will not be easy, but you are no longer walking alone. Millions walk with you now." Sundar leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time in months, he felt something he had nearly forgotten. Not fear, not dread, but peace. Not because the danger had vanished, but because he had embraced the truth that even in a world of shadows, one humble voice could still carry light. The gunshot had been meant to silence him, but instead, it had pushed him to speak louder. And, though the future remained uncertain, Sundar understood one thing with unshakable clarity. Humility was not the opposite of power. Humility was power. The rare kind of power that no weapon, no threat, no shadow could ever silence.